Everything you learn about below is a legend and does not pretend to be true. At one time, the Nazis carried out simply terrifying experiments on people. Moreover, these could be various forms of testing biological and chemical weapons, poisons, extreme endurance of the human body, as well as countless medical experiments. Almost all of these projects were aimed at making soldiers completely immune to pain and suffering, but at the same time such practices often left people wounded, deformed, disabled, and naturally dead. However, there was one Nazi experiment that pursued a completely different goal, the achievement of immortality by people. Capsule D9. Hitler had one big dream and goal, to create super soldiers who would have improved physical capabilities, have no fears or any other restrictions for their battles, and it was for this purpose that a program called the experimental Capsule D9 was developed. In fact, it was a truly vigorous mixture. Prohibited psychotropic substances, the powerful stimulant Provitin, as well as a large dose of the powerful painkiller Evkodala. The Nazis believed that such a cocktail could significantly increase the concentration of soldiers, their heroism, and self-confidence. Moreover, according to their beliefs, the D9 capsule was supposed to increase endurance, strength, and also reduce the feeling of pain and the need for food and sleep. The first guinea pigs to use such a capsule were prisoners of the Sachsenhausen concentration camp, and it must be admitted that the results of the experiment turned out to be so promising that the drug was even given to military volunteers. Every soldier who wanted could take this capsule, and after that he would have to endure long and difficult physical exertion to check the result. It should be noted that experiment D9 demonstrated a sharp increase in endurance and concentration in all subjects. Just imagine. Now soldiers with their backpacks fully loaded could march non-stop for up to 130 kilometers, but were there really no negative aspects? Of course there were, and above all, the soldiers fell into a wild dependence on this drug. And despite this fact, the experiments were an incredible success. Officially, the D9 capsule began to be used in the field on March 16, 1944. Nazi immortality experiment. However, if you think that this was enough to create such a capsule for the super army mode, then this is an extremely erroneous opinion. Hitler wanted to ensure that his soldiers never died at all, and the army simply became immortal. It was from this time that the most insane tests began on living people, in order not only to remove their fatigue, but also to generally influence their mortality. Already in 1999, in Hamburg, it was possible to find special boxes containing old Nazi documents that described rather strange and sometimes terrifying experiments. One might even say that it was something like a mixture of science and the occult. Hitler and his inner circle believed that the human body dies only because the brain gives it such an attitude. They were convinced that it was the brain that completely controls all biological processes, including death itself, and puts us on a kind of timer that counts down the time until our death. The Nazis were well aware that if somehow this timer was permanently removed, the body would have the ability to function indefinitely. This would mean that even aging would no longer be a problem. For this project, the human mind was its own figurative disease that needed to be eradicated. Start of the experiment. The experiment to achieve immortality actually began in 1942, when German scientists began to deeply research this topic. For these purposes, a location outside Germany was chosen. Of course, it was Japan, the state that eventually became their ally. In fairness, it is worth noting that this particular country was considered another area of wild experiments. In Japan, a Nazi research group apparently commandeered an orphanage outside of Hiroshima for its horrific experiments. This was not something outlandish for the Nazis, since what could be better than children? The fact is that children were simply ideal experimental material, since German scientists believed that their switches had not yet been activated. As a result, it would be possible to study this entire mechanism in more detail. Apparently, the Nazis initially wanted to analyze the structure of the brains of adults and children, and in order to compare them, they wanted to find that elusive switch. Very little time passed when the statement was received, and supposedly it is located in the cerebellum, the part of the brain that controls all subconscious activity. And it was from this moment that the Nazis began to conduct real experiments. First of all, they tried to perform a series of complex operations on children, trying to remove the very area with the switch. However, the first attempts were extremely unsuccessful, which led to the death of the first subjects. Experimental success. Of course, this was all an absolutely terrible crime, but the children were orphans, so their disappearance should have gone unnoticed. They didn't even bother much about their funeral. The bodies were unceremoniously dumped in shallow graves in the forest. The series of experiments, of course, did not end there. Scientists continued to do what they started, and one day even they allegedly successfully removed the aging switch from a young girl. She entered in a coma, but somehow miraculously came back to life. German scientists were amazed by the fact that only one side effect appeared after the operation. Her body lost the ability to produce sweat. Moreover, every evening the subject fell into a fatal coma, her bodily functions ceased, and her heart stopped. But in the morning all these vital processes were restored and the girl returned to her previous life. It was a rather alarming state, but manageable. As a result, the Nazis recognized this procedure as very successful. After this, German researchers decided to continue moving in this direction, and admittedly, they achieved even greater success with their subsequent experimental subjects. But other experiments were carried out in parallel, most of which failed and led to irreversible damage to objects and their death. At the same time, the Nazis were toying with the idea that a chemical compound could also be used to deactivate the kill switch in adults. According to some old documents, it is safe to assume that such experiments were carried out not only on children, but also on some of the orphanage teachers. Also interesting are the diary entries kept by the Nazis. And now we will talk about them in more detail. Notes from a diary. The Nazis wrote in their documents that all tested children who successfully completed the experimental procedures began to behave in extremely strange ways. The diary entries read: at the beginning, children seem normal, they play, learn something new for themselves. As soon as they are separated from their peers, they become very detached and cannot somehow casually walk around. Looks into the eyes and shows a strange, frightening smile. Approaching them from behind, the children's heads jerk from side to side at an unnatural speed, then the expression on their faces becomes so vile that there is only one desire to run away. And here is another, ambiguous entry. Experimental children can keep an eye on us when we are alone. For example, one kid often looks at me from around the corner of a dark corridor. It scares me. When I start to go to my room, he follows me like a shadow. Sometimes it even seems like these children are ghosts. But finally, he will quote one more interesting entry. They are dreamy, forgetful, a little empty. Conditionally our experiments erase their memory, but the state of these children cannot be called innocent dreaminess. No, there's something else more sinister here. The end of the immortality experiment. When the war ended and the German troops were forced to accept defeat and retreat, the experiment to achieve immortality was also stopped, and the shelter was abandoned. It is still not known for certain what happened after this to those immortal children who were abandoned in the orphanage to fend for themselves. Their story turned into a real urban legend. And the myth of immortality, according to which, experimental children never grew old or died, there are rumors that they live there to this day. They also say that if someone gets the idea to visit an abandoned orphanage, then a fatal death will await them trial. He will have to become a participant in the Japanese children's game, Kagom Kagom. The rules are as follows. One player stands in the center blindfolded, and the rest of the players, children from the orphanage, surround him and begin to move in a circle, singing a creepy song. At one point in the central player you need to guess who exactly is standing behind him. You can't make a mistake, since the immortals the children will be killed and buried in the forest. According to that same urban legend, there were already people who failed the task and never returned. Of course, it is difficult to say whether this is true or not, but the real experiments carried out by the Germans are truly amazing and excite the blood. But that's all for today. Don't forget to rate the video, and of course, subscribe to the channel. Thank you all for your attention and bye.